everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Amy Gray. I'm the Media and Publications Project Coordinator for Youth Ministry. And today's webinar topic is music and youth ministry. And we're so excited to have with us both Jim Marriott and Lizzie Myers. Jim is the Director of Worship at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lisle, Illinois. He has undergraduate and graduate degrees in church music through Concordia, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, and he's currently pursuing a PhD in Liturgical Studies at Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary. Jim has a passion for youth music ministry. He's taught choir in Lutheran schools, led youth choirs at various congregations, and coordinated youth summer music camps. He's also a regular organ recitalist and lecturer in Christian venues throughout the nation. Jim cherishes sharing this life with his wife, Christy, and their two children, Joel and Kirsten. I bet it's Kirsten.
Yeah, we say Kirsten, but yes, that's right.
Okay, good. And then joining Jim is Lizzie Myers. Lizzie is a senior at Neuqua Valley High School in Naperville, Illinois. She's one of the founding members of Evangelii, the Lutheran Choir of Trinity, and also serves as the choir's executive director. She holds a staff position at Trinity. She's the producer of audiovisual worship resources and also leads the AV servant team. Very cool. Lizzie recently announced that she will be attending Texas Christian University in the fall, where she will pursue a degree in social work. It's great to have both you guys with us. Really looking forward to hearing from you. Let's go ahead and begin in prayer. If you would join me. Heavenly Father, we are told to make a joyful noise unto you and to come into your presence with singing. We thank you for the gift of music, for the gift of song, and the ability to use these gifts to your glory. Thank you for Jim and Lizzie, for the ways that you have gifted them and for the ways that they serve young people in and through music. Pray that you would bless them now as they lead this webinar on the role of music and how it can impact the lives of youth. All this we pray in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, take it away.
Awesome. Well, it's certainly an honor to be with all of you today and to be able to share some thoughts on music and youth ministry. It's a real blessing, real passion of mine, and we love being able to do it. And I'm glad that Lizzie was able to join us today and to be part of that as well. I serve at Trinity in Lisle, and you can see some of my bio information here for your reference if you want it later, and then here's Lizzie's as well. And what we want to do today is really tell you some of the stories of what we've experienced. My goodness, it's flying away. There we go. Some of the stories of what we have experienced at Trinity, and hopefully our stories will inspire your story as we continue in ministry together. So at Trinity, we like to brag and kind of boast that 40% of our participants in music ministry are youth, and we really put a high value in youth leadership and youth participation in our worship services. So I think that's a pretty high number and kind of reflects that importance, I guess you'd say, or the priority that we put in involving youth ministry. We have a number of probably 10 different ensembles at the church, and we have youth involved in every one of the ensembles. And there are a number of ensembles that we have that are almost completely youth and even have youth leadership to them. So we really see at our church that our youth are the ones that are some of our most skilled musicians. They're the ones that in middle school and high school are practicing instruments daily, are in band and in choir, are taking voice lessons, doing private study. They're the ones that are very much the accomplished musicians, and they're very invested in what they do and work hard at it. So they're very receptive and they like to learn. And one of the things, though, at least in our context, Trinity is a church, but it doesn't have a school associated with it. So we draw primarily from the public schools around us. Lizzie attends one of the larger public high schools here in this area. And one of the things I always hear from our youth as they participate in our music ministries is that they are part of very fine musical ensembles in their high schools and in their middle schools, but they don't often have the opportunity to have a gospel focus and a Christian witness as part of what they're doing. So their participation in church music gives them not only an outlet to be good musicians, but also to give a Christian witness and to grow in their faith. And so we've had a lot of success engaging kids in music ministry. So we have kids that play in our wind ensemble, which is a wind ensemble consists of brass instruments and woodwind instruments. We have a string ensemble that plays once a month that is almost completely youth, except for the director who also plays. We have youth in our handbell ensembles, and we have a number of kids choirs, and then Evangelii is our large youth choir, and we'll tell that story here in a minute. One of the things when you talk about engaging youth in music ministry, oftentimes there's kind of this stereotypical misunderstanding of youth and their musical style preferences. And I guess in our congregation, we have youth that participate in both our traditional and our contemporary services, and a number of youth that participate in both. Lizzie's one who attends both and goes back and forth. And so I think that as our synod as a whole grows out of the debate about musical style and kind of grows beyond the contemporary versus traditional worship wars that have kind of plagued us over the last 25 years, it's our youth that are really pioneering that change, that no longer do they really distinguish so much between musical style as they're looking for excellence and authenticity. And that we've really experienced that here at Trinity, engaging youth in a number of different genres and styles of music. We have a group that plays for our traditional services that does, we lead hymns in kind of a edgy folk style with guitars and percussion and violin and saxophone. And it is well received by the congregation, and the youth also really enjoy leading hymns in a way that is fun and engaging as well. And then we have, like I said, people who participate in our music ministry, in our wind ensemble and our choirs, and they're singing Palestrina and early church music just the same as we're doing modern stuff as well. So Lizzie's going to tell us a little bit about the story of Evangelii and how they came to be.
Yeah. Before I do that, I just wanted to add on to what Jim had said earlier about how there's so many youth involved and there's also a lot of adults involved. I think that music is one of those very cool things where it links and it's a gap. It bridges that gap between the adults and the youth in our church. And so we're all working together for a common purpose. And that creates a lot of good relationships and relationships that you wouldn't necessarily expect between like 6-year-olds and 60-year-olds. And it's very cool to see when those relationships come together.
Sure.
So the story of Evangelii is very cool. When I was in 7th grade, Jim would come to the confirmation classes that we had on Wednesday nights, and he would offer us chocolate if we would come and sing for him for like 30 minutes before confirmation. And I was like, well, I like chocolate, so yeah, I'll go. And 3 other kids thought the same thing. So there was 4 of us, and that's how the choir started. And now that big picture on your screen shows there's about 30 of us. So that's been a really cool growth over the last 5 to 6 years, really. That's all it was. And I think what really draws people is the authenticity of the group and just the familial nature of it. So the group kind of began with the chocolate and then eventually grew. Really, it did. Chocolate is a good one. And so it grew, excuse me, it grew from there. Just each week we rehearse for an hour and a half on Sunday nights, and it's right before the senior high youth group so that it can be more flexible and easier for people to get to, and they already have that time kind of chunked out of their week already, and so people are more receptive to coming then. And it's high school and middle schoolers, so there's a good range of kids that allows for a lot of mentorship relationships too. And so we rehearse once a week for an hour and a half, and then each summer we go on tour, which is one of our favorite things to do. I really love it because it's like 8 to 10 days, anywhere in there, of people just being together and really learning and seeing what it's like to watch someone live like Jesus and love like Jesus in their everyday actions. So people who don't come from a necessarily church-oriented background or Christ-driven life, they get to see that hands-on for like 10 days straight. And that that really makes an impact on people. And a lot of times kids will feel more loved than they ever have before in 10 days. And that's my favorite part about it. And we go to cool places. And our 2 years ago, we went to Texas, and we were part of the National Youth Gathering there, which was really cool. We were on the experiential floor, and we just got to sing for like 45 minutes, I think, for a couple days. And it was cool to be a witness there and to be with other youth there. And that's another thing that we really enjoy, is being a witness to other youth in our community and inviting them in. And that is pretty much the story of Evangelii. Did I miss anything?
Well, you talk about the summer.
Okay, this summer, yes, this is exciting. This summer we are going to New York, and we'll do a little tour around the New England area, going to New York City too, and singing in St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is very exciting. And we'll go to Niagara Falls and just tour kind of around that area as a group.
So the group has had some unique opportunities as they've grown, and I think, like Lizzie said, it's really the family nature of it that makes it a big witness. We do a lot of community work and working in our local community to sing at different places. Even when we were in San Antonio at the National Youth Gathering, probably my favorite performance of that tour was singing basically at a restaurant bar on the Riverwalk. And people walking down the streets walking down the Riverwalk, and in apartments across the street can open their windows. And we had one I think he was a Marine that even came down.
Newlywed.
Yeah, newlywed, and heard one song from his apartment window across the river, and came all the way down and asked us to perform it again so that he could enjoy it. And it was a really, just the opportunities that we've had to proclaim the gospel through music. Evangelii means gospel, and it comes from this saying, Viva Vox Evangelii, that God's word is the living voice of the gospel. Christ is the living voice of the gospel. And so we like to be that voice in how we sing. So that's our story. I thought we'd show you a recording, a YouTube recording that we have of our choir. This is our chamber choir that I'll show you. So a group of 10 singers, some of the older singers from this group, and this is us singing in St. Louis, a setting of Paul Monz's In So Lord Jesus Quickly Come. So that's our little recording there. And
Jim, really quick, where was that in St. Louis?
That was at, is it Laclede Grove or Laclede Garden Retirement Center?
Okay, yeah, Laclede Grove.
Yeah, in their chapel. It was a lovely space. It was just beautiful acoustics in there. And that tour was really fun. We got to sing at the seminary in St. Louis, and then at that retirement center, and then also at the IC. And we were very honored to be able to participate in all sorts of performances there. So that was a cool trip. So we've had that was probably the most singing for Lutherans we've done. We usually like to sing out in the community and do more of a community witness, but that was a fun, unique opportunity to sing at those places as well. So, our youth are just like any youth in any congregation, and I don't mean to generalize that, but we really hope that people can see that any congregation can do this, and our musicians are very talented, but every congregation that I've been part of has talented youth musicians like this, and I really love getting to inspire youth to use their talents to serve God in the church and to proclaim the gospel through music. And I find that the more they do that when they're young, the more they're likely to engage in that when they're older as well, and that really motivates them to create behavior and practice of participating in the church's ministry. So, plus, like I said at the beginning, they're well resourced. They're practicing every day, and so they're musically engaged. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love our adult choir as well, but it's a different focus. And they're not professional musicians either, but they don't sing every day, and they don't participate in other choirs. And so we really can get a high level of musical excellence out of these young musicians, and they have a lot to offer us in music ministry. So it's plus the relationships are so much fun in how they learn to build relationships around music. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So that's the story of Evangelii, our touring youth choir that grew from 4 kids and chocolate to 30 kids and heading to New York. So one of the other things, besides just having youth participate in music ministry, we also have worked really hard to equip youth as leaders in music ministry. It's not just that the adults organize the ministry that the youth participate in. I think that youth have ownership in ministry in general when they actually get to lead it. And I've seen that with some of the good DCEs that I know that actually work to empower the youth to lead rather than doing all of the leading themselves. And I've worked to model that also in music ministry, that we raise up youth leaders to lead in music ministry. And so Lizzie's certainly one of those, and if I'll tell some of your story, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that. That's good. So Lizzie, like she said, was one of the I call them the core 4 that started the choir, and over the years, Lizzie's grown. When we went to the National Youth Gathering, Lizzie, that was kind of the year that she became the executive director of the choir. So she does all of our administrative work, helps to organize the students in the choir around what they're supposed to do. Every time we would stop, she was the first one off out of the vans, making contact with our host sites. In fact, when we got to the National Youth Gathering, I had kind of been in choir tour mode and had forgotten that, this is a National Youth Gathering, and Lizzie had done all of the registration and had all of the materials and all of that. So we got to where we had to go in and register, and they said no youth beyond a certain point. There was a barrier, and so I had to go in there, and I didn't have any information because Lizzie had done all of the organization. So that was I finally convinced them to let Lizzie come through, and we got it all worked out. But she's been a great leader. Lizzie has a way with people that she just loves people and loves kind of visioning people around a cause. So Lizzie became our executive director of the choir, and now she also is training up 2 other people to be in leadership of the youth choir as well, including a sophomore that we're hoping will kind of take over as the executive director when Lizzie graduates this year. So I not only do we equip leaders to serve, but we're equipping leaders to lead other leaders and so that it's kind of generative in that way.
I'm going to interject. Yeah, and I think the really cool thing about it is that the whole focus behind it is servant leadership. And so in each thing that we do, I know I personally strive, and I think this is because of like your model and just because of like this is how Jesus led. You know, he led through making himself the least of these, and he was willing to be the first one to do something because he wasn't sure how it was going to go and wanted to make sure that everything would be okay for everyone else. And I think that that's a really cool model that Jesus laid out for us. And just by focusing on that and reminding ourselves of what our goal is and why we're doing what we're doing is a consistent thing that we have to keep doing in order to keep being good leaders.
That's right.
That's all.
That's good. Thanks. So the other person that we have really worked to equip in leadership over the years is this girl, Erica Heglin. Erica's now a freshman at Valparaiso, and she's studying music education. She was in the choir. She came into the choir a year or two after Lizzie, but really became a leader very quickly. She's a very talented musician who had no conducting skills, but I came to her and asked her, what she wanted to do with her life, and she said she wanted to pursue music education. So I asked her if she wanted to learn some conducting. So we did some summer sessions. I taught her the basic fundamentals of conducting, and she picked it up pretty quick. And then I had her start conducting the youth choir. And so she worked with me as kind of the associate conductor for the youth choir. And I would play the piano on some pieces, and she would conduct them. And then she also became a conductor for our woodwind ensemble and a number of different ensembles, to the point that finally, the year that she graduated, she was conducting significant portions of our Christmas concert and leading in that way as well. So, and she went on to become the drum major at Neuqua Valley, and like I said, now is studying music education at Valparaiso. So she's another good story of people that we've been able to equip as leaders in music ministry. And she also has worked with me to teach and coach other student conductors that I'm now working with in our choir as well. So, and every time she's home, I always bug her to come help and do things with us as well. So she's become a really great leader for us. And genuinely, both Lizzie and Erica have become friends of mine too. And that's kind of a unique thing in ministry to be friends. But that's one of the things that I really try to foster as a leader is authentic relationships. And I think that sometimes we put up barriers that keep us from fostering those relationships, that keep us from engaging people in ministry. And I'm sure there's lots of different opinions on that. And I'm not a youth leader, and I haven't done youth psychology and things like that. But I certainly have had a lot of success developing relationships that have grown into friendships in some cases with some of the students in our choir. And we're going to talk a little bit more about relationships.
Really quickly, I think the cool thing also about the leadership model, and not model, but like the way that leadership has worked in this choir is that you're not, like, Jim wasn't looking for one specific thing or one specific person. He kind of just saw things that needed to be done and people who could do them, and that worked really well. So, like, I'd never expected myself to be an executive director of a choir because I can barely keep myself in rhythm, but there was a place, and there was a place for leadership, and just an opportunity to serve more. So I think keep an open mind to things like that is very helpful.
Yeah, and using people's gifts and setting them up for success. I mean, that's what I see my role here at Trinity as, is equipping people to be successful in leadership and service. And if I can be doing that, then we're succeeding together. So that's how we've equipped leaders. And then we've really found that relationships are the catalyst for everything that we do. And Lizzie talked about that the choir is really a family-oriented feel. I remember last year we were on tour, and we ended up with our host home situation, all staying in the same house for a majority of the tour. And then we stayed at a camp, and we, again, were all basically in the same house for that night as well.
On separate floors, boys and girls.
Right. We were distinguished that way, but still in the same building and spent most of the evening together. And it's amazing how we never got sick of each other. And so we certainly have our share of drama that happens every once in a while in our choir. but the relationships are very meaningful. And I love to see how the older members of the choir engage the younger members of our youth choir as well. And that happens throughout our music ministries. Our youth choir is 5th grade through 12th grade, so we do have a number of very young members of the choir, and yet they really look to the older members as mentors and almost older siblings in some ways. And there's a really beautiful relationship there. And I have found that playing basketball on Fridays with a number of our youth is a great way to engage the boys. Boys don't like to talk about their feelings as much, but they certainly will play basketball, and there's such a connection relationally there that way. And so that's been a great catalyst for me for building relationships to get people into the youth choir, is even just playing basketball or hanging out with some of the guys. And, I'll have some of the girls in our choir that will text me at very late hours of the night, and I'm sure all of you as youth ministers out there have the same thing, where you have your youth kids texting you about boyfriends and family issues and all of this. I finally got on InstaChat and InstaChat.
That's a combination word of Instagram and Snapchat.
Yeah, I like to tease a little bit just so I can act like an old man where I'm doing the InstaChat and the Snapgram. But so I got an Instagram and Snapchat, and so I get to do all of those things now and communicate with our youth in in the ways that they're communicating with each other.
And I think that that's one of those ways that the boundaries are cut off, because for us, especially as a youth, there's constant connection, and I personally don't have a Twitter. So, I am constantly, kind of trying to keep up with my friends. And I think that the cool thing about being connected via, Instagram or Snapgram or Snapchat, any of those ways, is it's how people do relationships, especially youth. Yeah. That's another barrier to knock down.
We're pretty big ice cream fans in our choir, too, and I'm a huge ice cream fan, and so we have lots of ice cream and pizza, and that's another great, obviously a great way to bring people together as well. So I think you were going to tell some stories about, do you remember the stories you're going to tell about relationships, or did you do that?
Yes. So the cool thing about the choir is I think the relationships built are so authentic and so natural. So there's one girl in our choir who is a 5th grader, and a lot of our kids this year actually are 5th graders, and are a little bit concerned about going on the choir tour because they're going to New York for 8 days away from their families, and that's very concerning for 5th graders, but their parents sign them up and they're ready. So that's really exciting for us that they just have so much faith in the group. And I think the wonderful thing, kind of going back to the mentorship relationships, is how they just they cling on and they give you hugs, and it's very older sibling, younger sibling-like, and that's only created through the openness of the older members as well as the younger members feeling, they walk in and they see that environment and they feel it and they're comfortable. And so creating that sort of environment by being open and, again, I'll probably keep saying it 4 more times, but just knocking down those barriers. I don't know of any relationships that have ever been hurt by knocking down barriers and allowing kids to be a part of your life in family relationships and in friendship relationships, because that's how they see what it means to live for Jesus. I think parents do an awesome job of that at home, but not every kid has a parent situation that they're dedicated to living for the Lord as much as an ordained church worker. So we get to do that in a really cool way in our choir. So that's my favorite story of relationship.
I think it's really important to distinguish relationships and programs a lot of times. I think, it'd be one thing for us to sit here and say, well, we have a youth choir that tours nationally, and we've grown from 4 kids to 30 kids, and, we do excellent music, and that's all great. But the reason it works is because of relationships. I went around with chocolate, 6 years ago to get 4 kids to come sing because I wanted to start a youth choir. I learned in that process that the way to build what we were doing was through relationships. And so it's not the program that keeps people coming. These kids have great musical opportunities in their schools. It's really the relationships in the ministry that helps them to choose to engage in youth ministry at our church. And that's for all of our ensembles. And youth choir is just maybe the most focused example of that. But all the way throughout our ministry, it's the relationships that keep people focused on what our purpose is in ministry. One of my favorite, favorite, maybe not the right word, but one of the most stirring stories that I've told or experienced in our youth choirs. A couple of years ago, we had, it was last year. Last year, yeah.
Beginning last
time
year.
Flies. Last year, one of our members' mother passed away, and so we had the opportunity to sing for her funeral, and that was a very unique opportunity for our youth choir to sing at a funeral of one of our moms, and it was very emotional, and I was very proud of the choir because they did a great job of keeping their composure and being able to witness clearly the gospel through music, even though we were all very broken by the loss and by hurting for our friend. But we were able to teach 1 Corinthians 12:26 in a pretty unique way, where we were really rejoicing with one another and suffering with one another as family. And that was one of the more pivotal moments of our youth choir's experience, is that opportunity to sing and to witness and to bless a family in such a broken time, especially a family that we were very closely connected to because it was one of our own. So that's what ministry is. That's what music ministry needs to be. It's not about building programs, even youth ministry. It's not about how many kids you have coming to your youth group or how many kids you have going on your mission trip. It's what are you doing with those kids to proclaim the gospel through what you're doing. And that's not just with words, but it's with actions and relationships and how we live together and we live out the gospel. And that's what our music ministry is all about, and that's what we model to our youth. And that's why I think our youth get involved in music ministry at our church, is because we're doing that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think on a more academic level, in the same way, through that funeral, it sticks out to me as one of the highlights of our choir, is that we got to see that whole situation and be a part of it, and also a lot of kids really got to learn how to grieve well in a Christian way, and how to grieve really functionally, and how to get through such death, which is such a huge topic and it's really hard to tackle, especially when it's not going on, because we don't really talk about death when death is going on. We talk about it randomly and just throughout the year. But it was a really great opportunity for all of us to learn that, and then to also be able to support one another right there. And that girl is the daughter of the mom who died, is just wonderful, and still is a part of the choir, and definitely sees us as one of her support systems, and that's been a very cool thing for us to do. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's kind of a good stopping point for collecting some questions and reflections, if you guys have any.
Yes, thank you, guys. So how this will work is you'll see there's a chat box on the left-hand side of your screen where Nathan Schmidt's already made some comments. That's awesome. If you have any questions or reflections, thoughts, that's the way that you can share them there, and I will pass them along to Jim. So please don't be shy. Jump right in. Any questions that you might have about doing youth ministry with youth, or any other questions you might have for Jim and Lizzie as you've heard them talk. In the meantime, Jim, I have a question for you. You're obviously very gifted in musical leadership. What would you tell to a congregation who would like to start a program like this but doesn't have a Jim Marriott at their church? Where do you get started? How do you go about doing something like this?
I mean, I think the whole point for us is that it's not about the music. It's about the relationships in the ministry. I mean, in every church in the United States, God has given them what they need to proclaim the gospel in that place. And so the musical leaders in that community, the only thing we want to do is to vision them on the opportunity that they have to engage youth musically, because I would guess that there's a number of congregations out there that have youth that feel very unengaged and unconnected to the worshiping community, and I hear that from youth a lot. So just having the opportunity to use their gifts musically, use the skills that they're developing through the week in their academic training, and to be able to use them. And really there's resources out there for writing simple instrumental parts that can accompany a hymn. There are simple choral works that can be done with youth, even in unison voices. Our choir for a long time, when we were growing, sang in two parts and even in unison a lot of times, and just doing the best that you can do with what you have to engage people in the task of ministry for the sake of relationships, for the proclamation of the gospel. That would be what we want to vision people on. So it's not about who is leading, it's about how they are leading and how they're choosing to engage people in that process.
If I can interject too, I would encourage a church like that to go and ask your youth, invite them to come do things, invite their parents, because a lot of youth won't want to unless they're comfortable, so invite a lot of people and just ask one or two kids if they'd be comfortable leading, if you know that they're musically inclined and are involved in that. I think they'd be more willing than expected. And the other thing is to just really trust, like God will provide that and He'll bless that. I don't know of anything else that God wants more than His gospel proclaimed.
Right. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It's just all about doing it and building the relationships through it.
That's great. Thank you, guys. You talked a little bit about unengaged people or youth at your congregation and getting them involved. Can you talk more about, have you used this for outreach, or even people you talked about, there's public high schools around, people who maybe aren't connected to Trinity already? Do you see an outreach component to this as well, as far as people who have become a part of the choir or associated with it or anything like that?
I have a good story, actually. So just this past quarter, I came to Jim and I asked him to write a piece of music for my choir, because we auditioned to sing for our graduation, and we didn't know what we were going to sing, and so we asked him to write us a piece. And just by him doing that, like 16 other girls now know who this guy from this church who did this free thing for us is, and he wrote this awesome piece of music, and they're just, all that they know about Jim is that he's the worship director and the choir director at my church. And so for them to see that, like, that's what a church worker does, is they make free music for high school students to sing. But they really appreciated that. And now they have, I think, just a better view of what it means to be a Christian.
We've had, one story that I can think of is one girl that tends to always bring her boyfriends into the choir, and those include boyfriends that are not part of our church, and so that's been really neat. And I think that the choir has the momentum now where people are talking to their friends. I know it hasn't worked out yet, but you've invited a number of friends into the choir from the outside, and honestly, for a lot of people who are outside the church, it's just an extra time investment and commitment that is hard for youth to make these days. And we had, that's a story we didn't tell, but even in our choir, there were a number of, especially early on years, where we'd have a couple of altos one week and a couple of boys the next week for rehearsal, and we rarely had the whole group. You say that there was 11 in the group, we rarely had the whole group together, and I kept thinking every week, well, this will probably be the last week of the choir, and they'll stop coming, and but no, people just stayed dedicated to it, and finally, now we've got the commitment to excellence that people come to rehearsal each week, and they probably skip more homework than they should in order to come to rehearsal, but that's part of it too. You build a program that youth want to be a part of, and I think we're at the point now where the opportunities that we're giving people, we are inviting people from outside of the church to be part of that, and it's neat to see people responding to that.
Definitely. And also, another thing that I think has been found through, like, church attendance is that parents will come if their kids do, and if their kids want to be at church and they want to be invested and they want to be doing something, parents really want to be there, and they want to encourage that. So oftentimes, kids wanting to come to the choir and be a part of that, can just draw parents in more too and draw their entire families in.
Cool, thank you guys. Susie has a question here asking about the software that you mentioned to write parts for instrumental parts or the simple music. Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, I just put that in there. You can find both of those if you did a Google search for either of those. I use Finale, and you can even get Finale Notepad, download it for free, and try it out and see if it's going to work for you. I have a keyboard hooked up to my computer so that I can play things in, and when going to school, that's what I learned at Concordia Seward was Finale, and that's what I used to write and arrange all of the music for our ensembles. But there's some good programs out there.
Great. Thanks for your question, Susie. Again, if there's anything else you would like to ask Jim or Lizzie, don't hesitate to jump on in. One other thing I was thinking about listening to your stories and the relationships with your youth and those kinds of things is what else, how does this music ministry coincide with other youth ministry opportunities going on at Trinity, or are the majority of those youth a part of this, the choir? How does that work together, even with trips and, time during the week or on weekends, that kind of a thing?
Sure. You want to take that or me?
Yeah, I can take this one.
It's a complicated story, but good.
Yeah, that's actually I'm glad that you asked that. So at the beginning, I think it was much easier as we were smaller and there was 4 or 5 kids who were invested. But as it grew, a lot of people, myself included, we would make choices on Sunday nights about, am I going to spend an hour and a half at youth choir, or am I going to spend 2 hours at youth group, or am I going to spend 3.5 hours at church on Sunday night when I should be doing my homework? And a lot of kids honestly try to work around that and try to get involved in doing both of them or doing part of them each week. But also, I think that faced us to ask a question in the choir of, well, how well are we doing youth ministry, and are we a part of the youth group as a whole rather than our own entity? And we definitely wanted to be a part of the youth group as a whole, and so we try to focus more on that, and we serve as a part of the youth group service often. It's on Sunday nights, which is right after our choir, and then kids also make just more intentional decisions about, okay, well, if I go to youth choir this week, I know that my focus on that is going to be how I'm serving the Lord through my music and through as I'm rehearsing. Which is always our focus overall. But I think people are more acutely aware of that. And that also helped us to focus more on really ministering to people, especially on our choir tours when we're together for so long, starting each morning with prayer, and we pray during our rehearsals, and we try really hard occasionally to take 15 minutes at the end of each rehearsal and just spend time praying for each other. Or maybe digging into Scripture at some point if we can.
And I think that one of the things that has been a journey for us is for people in our congregation, and especially the youth leaders in our congregation, to see the youth choir as a ministry. So youth choir tour is a different type of ministry than some of our summer, construction mission trips. And yet the element that they share is the relational connection with the community and the relational connection with each other. That by living and learning and growing together, we're growing in our knowledge of the gospel and how we live it out, not only for a week on a trip, but also in our daily lives. And so that kind of faith formation, I think, happens very effectively in our choir. And that's been one of the places we've really tried to vision people in our congregation to see this type of youth engagement and music ministry as a legitimate type of youth ministry and as a legitimate type of Christian witness and service to the world.
That was definitely a great question.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for taking some time today and sharing about just your story and the journey that you've been on at Trinity and with the youth choir and the focus on relationships and living life together. All that's been really, really encouraging, and it's been great to hear your story, so I appreciate that a lot. As we close the day, if there's any final thoughts or things that you want to share with us before we close.
Sure. So I just want to encourage anyone who engages this that just there's an awesome potential for involving youth in a diverse and eclectic music ministry. Youth play a variety of instruments. They sing a variety of genres and styles of music, and it's just great to involve youth in music and to find that connection. And I especially Lizzie talked about the intergenerational aspect of that, bridging the gaps generationally. I think music and involving youth in music has a great potential for doing that. And also, anytime you engage youth in ministry and service, I think that we should always be looking to engage them also in leadership and to teach leadership through the way that we equip people for leadership. So we've had some success with that in music ministry, and we would want to encourage people to look to do the same. And then it's probably pretty apparent, but that relationships are the keys to everything that we do. And it took me a long time to really learn that relationships were the key to ministry. I was very program-driven for a long time. And just in the last couple of years, I've really figured out that relationships are really the driving force to ministry. And I've changed my whole approach to how I engage people because of how I really try and focus on relationships first.
Absolutely.
So if you want to follow us, you can find us on Facebook, Evangelii, the Trinity Youth Choir. And then I also put these recordings here, some other recordings of our choir that from that particular performance in St. Louis. And you can kind of see from this list of recordings the eclectic set of music that we do. We do early music and contemporary stuff and everything in between. This year, I wrote an arrangement of the David Crowder song, How He Loves, for our seniors. And so we're performing that on our tour this year with violins and guitar and percussion and the choir. So, and we have a kind of a classic now version of In Christ Alone that's been around my choirs for a long time. So you'll find that in these recordings as well.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys so much. It really has been a pleasure. Hope that your tours this summer go well, and I thank you for what you guys are doing and how you're serving so many. It's been great. Thank you also for everyone who joined us today and was a part of this webinar, and for those of you who are watching it later, pray that the Lord would continue to bless you as you serve youth and encourage you in that service. We'll see you next month for our next LCMS Youth webinar. Thanks for joining us, guys. Have a good day.